Hello everybody, it's vanburman here. Welcome back to another video, and I mentioned briefly in my office tour video that I've been working on some spreadsheet. um, yeah, so I'm going to go through that today and just talk through my idea, visions, and really a call for any thoughts or improvements basically to it. So the preface of the idea is trying to construct this grand list that is very much, of course, my opinion on video games, the ones that I have played throughout my time, and particularly ones that I can remember enough about to be able to do so. So I was trying to set a little bit of a criteria, even though it's quite difficult in terms of how we go about or how I go about scoring them to put them into a definitive list, and then what kind of what kind of metrics do I want off the back of it? What do I want to penalize, for example, or what do I want to praise? So, like, do I want to penalize microtransactions, for example? I would suggest that I would do in this list, like, bringing things all together. So, yeah, so I'm going to talk through that and talk through some of the methodology. So if you're interested, do stick with me. If not, then what's the TLDR? TLDR is I made a list of 500 games and I'm going to rank them. And then we're going to do a few videos on how that will work. Like I do with the top 5 games of whatever year list. And then more can spawn from that. Just be like a long, enduring project, I suppose. So new games will go on there as well. But I guess without further ado, let's kind of really get into it. So I'll just switch over to we're going to have a kind of like a bit of an Excel view in this one today. But, hopefully you will get to understand a little bit more of what I'm trying to do here. So I must say the list is not finished at all. I don't know why it's 72 up there. Why is the number 72 there? Not sure. It's just meant to be like as an ID column, that's all. Right, yes, so I currently have 500 games on here, although what I will say is I do need to make some adjustments to this because I think there's a few on there that I haven't, and then there's some other ones that I can add in. So I've tried to set the basic criteria of have to have played the game, generally for like 5 hours or more to be able to formulate a score for it. And then, or if it's some games are less than 5 hours, or I've played the game enough where I can give it a good, a good score based on my feeling towards it. Now, quite clearly, some games have been released the year I was born, so depending on when I've played them, depends, or how often I play them throughout the years, depends on, kind of whether I can give them a score. And I have omitted at least 50-ish odd games where I kind of have a sentiment towards them, but I can't give them a score, I suppose. And yeah, so it kind of makes things a little bit more tricky. So I'll just go through it across the line, and you will be able to. Oh, I've given a score away there. So I have blanked off the scores that I've put in so far. They're not all done. They're not all concrete. They need some tweaking and moderation, and I'll go through some of that as we go through. So, and some of these I need to do, once again, I need to do some auditing on. So let's start off with the one that's on top of here, 1991 game, Final Fantasy IV. So it's an RPG. I think the RPG stuff is a bit more obvious, I guess. There are some games that sort of blur the lines between being, action or a fighting game or an RPG. So I will just make a call on each one as and when I need to. Then we've got platform. So I can go through the different platforms that we do have on here. So we've got Android, so Android mobile games, the Atari ST, Dreamcast, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color. So I've separated out Game Boy Color and Game Boy, even though you could argue that they're kind of similar, I suppose, and the Game Boy Advance to a degree. But anyway, although I did also have the Game Boy adapter for my cousin had the Game Boy adapter for the GameCube. So I've also played them on the GameCube as well. So yeah, kind of a bit of a strange one. Nintendo 64, PC VR. I felt like VR games maybe be separate, and there's not a huge amount of them anyway. PS Vita, PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5, PSP, PSX, obviously PlayStation 1, Switch, Wii U. I think there's only one Wii U game, might be two Wii U games. Xbox 360, and Xbox One. So I don't have any Xbox Series X. I've never owned that console, so that's not on there. So there's a good amount of platform on there, and the bit that is really tricky for me, that I don't have a fully fledged idea on yet, is how I go about judging games with platforms, if that makes sense. So if we take a tricky one, which would be like either Skyrim or Oblivion or even Fallout 3, for example. So I take Oblivion. I played most of that on an Xbox 360, but I also had it for a PlayStation 3, and I also do have it for the PC as well. And I've not played a non-insignificant amount of time on PS3 or PC. But to me, that's kind of an Xbox 360 game, because that's where I played it, and that's where I bought the Horse Armor DLC. So it kind of feels like it should go there. But then if I was doing a video where I'm looking at, the best PC RPGs, that should that then be on the PC, because it is released on PC? Yeah. It's a bit tricky, that. So I've tried to do it on the platform in which I played it on. Yep, that's it. The release year then is also difficult, because Final Fantasy IV did come out in 1991, according to Wikipedia. But I didn't play it till much later. But I did play it on PC, because I played it when it came out on Steam. So I didn't play the 1991 version of Final Fantasy IV, but it did come out in 1991. So yeah, once again, that is difficult. I've sort of kind of made the executive decision that the games will be put on here for when they came out, unless there is a really compelling reason to make it the newer release date, so to speak. So I've kept Final Fantasy IV in 1991 because I think the essence of the game and the story and everything is still there. The new graphics and animations and stuff, I don't think add to its score at all. So I've kind of kept it there, 1991, the Final Fantasy IV. So then we have a score out of 10. So that is just really to give me like a baseline for it to go on, where it fits in. I'll go through maybe that was a good time to go through the scoring, because that's where it's helped me, for example. So this is not a very interesting, well, it is an interesting sheet, but it's not it's basically just to try and keep it separate, I suppose. So 0 to 10, that is the scores, and as you can see, 6 is an average game, so it is kind of more weighted up, but it's not. I mean, I would probably argue that nowadays a 7 is probably seen as an average game, but I wanted to really use the full 0 to 10. No games have got 0, because 0 is just not a game. So if it was on here, it shouldn't be on here because it's not a game. And then I've tried to give like a word when I think about a game, and I try and think about which word best describes my feeling towards this. And then I've also tried to give, this sort of does give away some of the scoring methodology, I suppose, or some of the, what you might expect. So I've tried to pick ones that are kind of middle of that band. So, well, there's not really many ones, but yes, the Elder Scrolls Blades for the mobile, really bad. Disaster, yeah. Ryzen 2, awful. Probably one of the worst video games I've played on PC, riddled with all sorts of issues. A bad game, Dragon Age 2. A not great game, Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 is not, or not bad, I suppose. It's fine. And then 5 being okay, like has some, I guess, like 5, the game has some redeeming qualities. 6 is kind of middle of the road. Maybe it's been a bit adventurous and not pulled it off. I would maybe, be tempted to give something a 6 out of 10 for that, but that's kind of where I kind of expect the average overall score for all 500 games to be somewhere in the 70s, mainly because, there is some bias to, you are probably more likely to play games that you enjoy because you've picked to play those games. Like, I don't have every single Call of Duty on here because I haven't played every single Call of Duty. And I probably wouldn't give them very good scores. So, I would expect that hopefully I've been quite good at choosing which games I want to play, and therefore the score for those games are higher. We then have good games. So my example for that is Final Fantasy 15. It was a good game. Good to average, I suppose. Anyway, never mind. Great game, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. Yep. Fantastic game, Final Fantasy 10, Final Fantasy 7, Oblivion, and perfect. Perfect is maybe a tad too strong. I would probably say like near perfect, but the 10s has to be a 10 in there, right, to balance everything else, to anchor against everything else. And Final Fantasy 9 and Baldur's Gate 3 are in there for me, which probably, that's quite a big spoiler, I suppose, and may not be a surprise if I release a top 5 vanburman top 5 games. You're going to see those two in there, and probably the ones, but as I say, there are modifiers and stuff, so it's maybe not quite as obvious as that. Maybe that's where I should have gone with next. And then I've kind of got some other sheets where down here you'll see where I've been toying with some of the data that I've already put in. So if we head back, so from that I get my out of 10 score, and then I give it a score out of 100 to try and break it down a little bit more, finer, to sort of try and pick between, because lots of games could be a 7 out of 10, right? But not all 7 out of 10s are going to be equal. So a score that it came out on release. So kind of thinking about that game for the time, kind of thinking about that game nowadays. And I think it might be quite easy for people to think, or for one to think, that the current score is always going to be lower for an older game. However, one of the things I found is that my sentiment to a lot of the older games increases by the fact that, in my general opinion, games and the stories for games are overall worse. Not that is always the case, of course. So therefore, there is a chance that the sentiment towards that game, the current score, will be higher. Then an aggregate score that just gives the average of those two, so helps give it a base line, and then that's our one score. That's an overall score for the game. Before we start thinking about other aspects, which I'll go into now, which does affect the final score, for example. So like the true score, I suppose. Now, there is a part of me that thinks some of this stuff that you can see on that side, actually, my face is in the way. Some of the stuff you can see over here, that may make an influence on the scoring previously. And that may be true. And I think that's okay. But I then want to further punish games for doing the other kind of business gaming manipulation tactics as well. So we have cosmetic DLC. Now, once again, I sort of have to be quite subjective, I guess, when looking at this. So if we take The Witcher 3, for example, The Witcher 3 has... Actually, in fact, The Witcher 3 is actually just a very good example in any case. So maybe, I think I might have filled out The Witcher 3, actually. So let's just do The Witcher 3. Very good example of a lot of the stuff that I want to... Or some of the issues, I guess, that I have. Or is it The Witcher 3? Yes. Really highlights some of the issues that I just have in general with trying to do some of this, even though I am committed to doing it. So, came out to 2015. I did play it on PC anyway, so that was fine. Overall, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. My release score was 88 because I found it very difficult to get into at the start, and it did need some patches and stuff to get it up to a really good standard. And therefore, my current sentiment now, having had to go back to it some years later and play it through, and it being one of the best RPGs I've played, it then gets a 94, which, of course, does give you a much lower aggregate score. I mean, there is a world in which, it gets a higher score than that. So technically, The Witcher 3 does have cosmetic DLC. Now, the the point of this section here, apart from the expansions bit, which I'll go into when I get into it, is basically to punish the game developers in a way and reduce the score of these games to give balance to the list, I suppose. So while there is cosmetic DLC for The Witcher 3, it's all free and it was all made prior to the game's release. It's not been cut out of the game, added in earlier, or in an attempt to try and make money. So therefore, in the spirit of what this is here for, it doesn't need a yes in that column. But let's say that we did, because I'm all up for doing some fantasy spreadsheet, which is what basically all of this is. So if I said, yeah, go on then, it's got cosmetic DLC, that then brings it down to a 90. It then does technically have DLC. Once again, the DLC, so in The Witcher 3's case, I've decided to classify them as expansions, because they kind of are as well. I think one of them definitely is. Blood and Wine is definitely an expansion. Anyway, but yes, so then let's say I was being really harsh. Let's say I think that's DLC. But once again, it was made after the game came out. So all of a sudden, we've gone from a 91, which is probably probably really representative of how I feel about the game, now down to an 88. So all of a sudden, it brings it into, territory of the 8 out of 10 games rather than the 9 out of 10, and probably almost certainly actually moves it out of the top 10, top 15, top 20, of games. Whereas expansions is more just, it's a modifier. It doesn't change anything. If I take out expansions, it doesn't change the final score. And that's because I just wanted to note down where expansions had been made, and in some cases, that is a beneficial to the game. The game's done well enough that post-launch an expansion has been made, and like Shivering Isles, for example, is a great example of that. However, Oblivion suffers from having its other DLC. But yes, so I've decided not to give it DLC, not give it cosmetic because of those reasons. I think it behooves me to be fair and have some sort of controls around that. Microtransactions, pretty much as it says, things like Rocket League, for example, with the microtransactions, Counter-Strike, that kind of thing. Microtransactions in there. Pay to win, I don't think I have any that are pay to win at the minute, but like I say, my full list is not fully evaluated, so that does give you quite a significant point reduction. That's 10 points, which is enough. I feel like 10 points is about as harsh as you can really give one aspect of a game, because that does drop it down into a whole other section, right? And then we've got things like max DLC. So that is 5 points, I believe. So the actual thought for this one was the Crusader Kings 2 and Crusader Kings 3, where yes, you have a base game that's really good, but in order to have the full experience, you have to have access to all of the extra DLC that's available. So yeah, so that's like 5 points, which is more than just the 3 points that you would lose. Is it 2 points for DLC? So it really is like quite punishing because it's half a scale, so to speak. Expansions do nothing, and if the game is offline, so things like Guns of Icarus, is it called Guns of Icarus? The airship one that I really enjoyed back in the day when I very first started doing gaming stuff on this channel. That's now no longer online, so that also, if I'm on the right one, that also will give you a 10-point deduction as well into the final score, because I kind of feel as though if a game is not currently available to be fully enjoyed in that way, then yeah, it should lose that final score element when we're coming to totting up and putting stuff into lists and that kind of thing. I think that basically covers all the broad spectrum of things that I am concerned about. Now, it does occur to me that there may be certain game developers that should potentially get a bit more of a kicking than others, like a Ubisoft tax or an EA tax. But there's lots of game developers in which we don't know their ethics of, and therefore maybe it's kind of unfair to single out those ones and those games specifically. I think the nice balance that we have is that the majority of the games that fall afoul of having DLC, microtransactions, that kind of thing, are the same companies that are really have been quite unsavory in the past. So I've kind of decided at the minute that I will leave that out. As you can see, I don't have like a publisher and a developer section, which could change, but I feel like I'm fairly happy with this amount of information. I think that helps me build, some good, or should allow me to build some good metrics, that's it, together. So if I just show you all the games, I'll run through them alphabetically as well, just so you can see what's on here. You might have to pause and stuff, but yeah, basically I do need to do a little bit more cleansing, because I've realised that I haven't played every single FIFA game from 2002 to 2022. I don't think I've played 21 and 22. I need to go. It's quite difficult sometimes. I need to go back and find out which ones I have and haven't played, but also want to capture my sentiment towards the series and maybe how it's gone over time. Introduction to microtransactions, that kind of thing as well, will affect things. I've then got most of the Final Fantasy games, or at least all the ones I've played or played enough of in order to be able to give a score to. Football Manager games as well, quite a lot of them. Naturally, lots of football management games in general, but it's a list of 500 games, so you're going to get that full array, things I've been interested in. We've got the Gran Turismo games, apart from Gran Turismo 6. I think I ever played that. Interesting. Or I don't remember it enough to be able to give it a score. So, yeah, Guns of Icarus, that is what it's called. So as you can see, I'm working my way through trying to ascertain correct release dates, trying to get the EU release dates rather than the Japanese release dates, because some of them for the older ones are what the internet wants to tell you first off. And yeah, we've got some gems, some interesting ones on there. Ones that may potentially have much lower scores than you might think. It's interesting here. Like, I think it would be interesting for people who, I guess, don't have, maybe come to this a little bit blind, I suppose. But I've got Metal Gear Solid 2, 4, and 5 in there. I've never played 1 or 3 enough to give it a score. And I only really played 5 enough where I can feel like I can give it any sort of score. But really 2 and 4 have been the ones that, 2 and 4 have been the ones that completed, basically. So yeah, so there's no completion requirement to be on here, but I have to have played it enough to know if I like it, if it's any good or not as well. I guess it's sort of the same with the Pokemon games as well, which is, had to make executive decision, blue and red together. I guess you could have said blue, red, and yellow together, but there is a difference. Yeah, I don't know how I will work that when it comes into making lists and that kind of thing, but we'll come to that when we get to it. And I think, is there anything else that's interesting on here? Obviously, lots of Tekken games, Soul Calibur games, Soul Edge, Elder Scrolls games as well. And basically nearly every single Total War game, other than the really early ones that I haven't played enough to be able to give scores to. So I didn't think it would be fair to have them in. And then games I totally forgot even existed, like White Knight Chronicles. Great game, by the way, for the PS3. Recommend playing it if you're into like the JRPG type of stuff. I don't know if it's any good anymore, but yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it when it came out. We've got some Yu-Gi-Oh games in there, some of the XCOM games. I've got a few on my, like some of the older XCOM games I do want to go back and play. So that would then give me the opportunity to add it to this list later on, even if the release year is a very, very long time ago. So that's why it's release year and not year that I played it, in order to be able to try and help with that, bringing it all together. So yeah, there we have it. Still, like I say, still some more work to do. I'm hoping to sort of bring some initial findings once I've gone through the full list of the full spreadsheet, and yeah, trying to make some like lists or some insight out of my own thoughts and preferences going forward. And it's just an interesting thought exercise. Don't know if anyone in the wider world is particularly that interested about which shooter game I think is the best or the worst, but for example, but I do find it quite interesting putting it together. So yeah, there is that, and then the difference between like an aggregate score, final score, have games got worse over time? Is that down to the prevalence of cosmetic, DLC, microtransactions? Probably. I don't know that for sure yet because haven't run the metrics. So, you know, yeah, it's one of those things that I think could be quite interesting. So yeah, if you do have thoughts on this, let me know. If there's stuff I need to, particularly if there's things that you think I should be adding, I'm happy to hear them. And then yeah, if so, hopefully I can do it at this stage where I'm still working through the list and getting it really sort of ironed out. But I would say I've made good progress on it. I know some of these release years are pretty blank. There's quite a lot. I don't know how many games there are in blanks. I'm gonna have a look now. That I still need to go through because this is probably one of the more onerous parts of doing it. The genre thing not so bad, I suppose. But yeah, I've got 238, so just under half. I haven't even got a release year yet. I think they've all been given scores out of 10 though. So yeah, made some. And then obviously this bit is a royal pain as well because I have to really put some of my own initiative into that. It's not just as academic as a release year because that is kind of what it is, and sort of the same thing with genre as well. But in any case, yeah, I found it quite enjoyable, if not a little bit strange, to think. And there's definitely more games that could go in here as well. So as and when I think of them, as and when I play them, so I'd quite like to add my 2025 games in here and then use this to make my list at the end of the year. Because previously I haven't had any way of tracking them. I have made a little small spreadsheet that just has each year since 2012, and I've put them together, going back and looking through my videos to see where they came. And it's funny actually, not all of them link up with this new methodology. Like the top fives do change a little bit since then, and I guess that kind of makes sense if we've got a release score and a score, current score, and then an aggregate score, and then taking off points for other bits. I mean, I guess like, I don't know, there's that aspect, isn't there, of if Battle versus Chess for some reason now came out with a DLC and it didn't have it before, it would lose 2 points all of a sudden and change its position. But it's not going to be perfect. And anyway, there you have it. So I've managed to spend nearly half an hour talking to you about the spreadsheet. So if you've cut this far, yeah, I would take a break, make a cup of tea, and leave a comment. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Do hope you enjoyed. Hope you find this interesting. And if you haven't, then hopefully maybe we will find the lists interesting once it's done. See you very soon. Bye for now.